you were supposed to spend 2 years helping them understand the Canadian market, like being their sort of like Team Canada coach. But then an opportunity presents itself to parachute into LA and work on the business, I guess, at the mothership.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened is there was a lot of meetings, and I flew to LA to go to these meetings on the Disney lot, which again, very cool opportunity.
Mm,
Um, but I think they finally realized after probably 8 months, they're like, "Hey, Jen, do you actually just want to move to LA and help bridge this gap closer? And you can learn the studio business and you can teach us about Canada." And at the time, I was like, it was a 2-year contract. I was like, sure, I can do anything for 2 years. And it ended up being 17 years that I stayed in Los Angeles.
whew,
I did
you
not
had
end up
fun.
yeah, I didn't end up working on Disney that long out of that as a proportion. But it was a great opportunity. It was a great chance to understand everything. It was probably only a year or 2 that I'd been there that they actually brought in a team here in Toronto to do studio marketing. So my client ended up being back in Toronto while I was in LA. The account went up for pitch and review. We lost the account. And then I started to get moved around to a bunch of different pieces of business in LA because at this point I was in a relationship with an American. So the
Mm,
company was being really helpful and like, hey, Jen kind of wants to stay here. How do we keep the job here for her? And then I eventually wasn't working on anything Canadian and only working on US accounts. That relationship ended and I still stayed in LA. And I was doing that for 17 years.
okay, so a couple things to pick apart here.
Yeah, do
When
that.
okay, no, this is a good one. I like it when people move around like this because there's a lot of nuances that nobody discusses. So you get the offer to move to LA. So if I was in your shoes, the first thing I'm thinking about is, are they going to pay me enough to live there properly? Because let's just say for argument's sake, you're very comfortable with your life in Toronto. And all of a sudden you're looking at it going, now I'm going to have an American mortgage, or maybe I have to rent in America and I have to give up my property here and sell that. So I'm starting to think like the long term, what kind of financial impact this is going to have on me. Don't go into dollars and cents, but do they say to you, look, we're going to look out for you. So when you do get here, you're not really too, and a lot of soccer teams in Europe tend to do this as well. They want you to be focused on playing, so all of the other sort of things that would happen outside or off the pitch, they kinda look after. So did Starcom jump in and say, "Look, don't worry, we'll help you sort out a place to live. We'll help you understand which neighborhoods you might wanna be in that are close to the office. We just need you to come here and be here on day 1 and just be solely focused on the task that we're hiring you for."
Yeah, it was a bit of both because it was a fixed term contract originally that I signed. The contract had things like how many times they were going to pay for me to return to Canada to see my family. They paid
Oh,
for
okay.
tax preparation for those first couple of years. The first month, they'd put me up in corporate housing. So it was like furnished housing so I could get my feet and my bearings around the neighborhoods. And they didn't really have, apparently, they were supposed to have somebody who was supposed to help me more, but it didn't happen, but there were so many people I already knew in the LA office from having worked with them for a year that people really helped. The way I actually found the place I lived in for the first 6 years is I was talking to a sales rep in Toronto and telling them that I was happening, and they're like, "Oh, I have this friend who lives in LA and is looking to rent out their house," and, like, introduced me to this Canadian who had a house in LA that ended up, against all odds, being less than 2 miles from the office.
Nice.
So
Again,
I ended
networking.
up networking, ended up living in this woman's house. She is, Emmy award winning. I've seen and touched her Emmy. It was very cool. So I lived in her house. I had 2 rooms in her house. She was barely there, and I lived there for, like, the first 6 years. I lived with that guy for a while, and then I lived on my own for a while. Um, but that was 8 years after being in LA. So they did help, and to the salary, they did adjust the salary to be appropriate for the US and for California. The funniest thing that happened was when I was signing all the paperwork, everyone's like, "Oh, this is gonna be so much better. You're moving to the US, you won't have to pay as many taxes." But it was California, so I paid
Mhm.
just as much taxes as in Canada, and I think I had this expectation my taxes were gonna be way less or my deductions were gonna be way less, and they weren't. So, that was the
No.
biggest surprise, really.
You gotta skip over the border to Nevada if you wanna get an exemption from state,
Mhm.
they don't have any state income taxes there. Okay,
Yeah.
so we talked about the personal adjustment, but what about the professional adjustment? Like, here's my question for you. Pretend you're doing the same job in Starcom LA versus Starcom Toronto. Are all the processes the same? Like, putting aside that the vendors you're dealing with are obviously different, but if someone comes to you with, say, $1 million media plan, Disney comes to you with $1 million media plan in LA, and, we'll say it's 100,000 in Toronto, the process of getting that on air or getting those billboards up and so forth, is it the same?
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same, so nothing changes there. So in many ways, it was just like riding a bike.
Yeah, and when I first got to LA, I was still running Canada. I didn't
That's
even
true,
have to
yeah.
use the US. But then as I was there, I learned more about the US, did more US things. The scale is obviously different. The dollars are obviously very different, but the process is exactly the same. Because I was in LA for a year and a half, 2 years. They moved me onto the US side of the business for a while. Um, didn't love that.
Well, why not? Why not?
Studio business is just way too self-important at the time. I don't know if it's still the same post-lockdown. Um, it just felt so self-important, like getting a phone call because the producer's wife didn't see an ad for a movie on CNN. I was like, "It doesn't
Uh,
make sense to be on CNN, but sure, I'll go buy some spots so the producer's wife can see it." And even the out of home you're buying based on who can see it on their drive home. Like, it was just stuff like that that felt weird. You don't really do that for many other accounts. I think there's sometimes you do, but it was all the time on studio business. I learned so much that I could take and start to use when I was working on some of the other US accounts I worked on over time. Yeah, but it was different. I think the biggest difference is really in the approach, which in the US, it is a lot more direct. I think in Canada, sometimes it's very passive aggressive. It is, I'm gonna talk around the thing I really want, is how
mm,
sometimes it comes off, whereas in the US, they want something, they're gonna tell you they want something.
gotcha.
And also a studio business, they're gonna do that more than anyone else, quite frankly. So I learned a lot there how to manage more directly and how to work with teams differently because of that approach. And when I came back to Canada, I had to unlearn a little bit of that. I was a little too direct when I got back.